Hi everyone, we'll just wait a few minutes until everybody logs on and then we'll make a start.
Have you had good weather today?
Oh, it's raining here at the moment. Yeah. What about you?
It's cloudy. It's been cloudy all day, but we haven't actually had any rain. It's been thinking about it. We're in a bit of a rain shadow here. It all gets dumped on Wales, funnily enough.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Still a few more joining, so I'll just wait a few minutes and then we'll get going. Right then, I think I'll make a start and then hopefully by the time I hand over to Alan, a few more will have joined us. Hello everyone, I'm Elin Haf-Jones, Menter Moch Cymru North Wales Development Officer. Elin Jones dwi, swyddog datblygu Menter Moch Cymru yma yn y Gogledd. Croeso cynnes chi gyd yma i'r webinar heno a Rheoli Torllwythi ar gyfer y perfformiad gorau posib. Warm welcome to you all tonight to our webinar on litter management for optimum performance. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're delighted to have Alan Stewart with us tonight, who is a senior lecturer in animal science at Harper University, with us to host the webinar tonight. Thank you again, Alan, for hosting this session. Looking forward for a very informative webinar once again with you. If you'd like to ask a question throughout the webinar, you're welcome to do this by using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Therefore, feel free to ask questions as we go and we'll try our very best to answer every question at the end. Therefore, Alan, I'll hand over to you now. Drosodd I chi wan, Alan.
Okay.
I'll put my camera off.
Yeah, do you want me to share the screen then?
Yeah, you can share your screen and I'll just confirm that I can see it before disappearing.
Right. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Oh, it's on there. Okay, so you've seen the presentation now. Was that clear?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for having me. As Ellen said, I'm a pig specialist at Harper. I'm going to try and present something slightly different from Richard. Richard last year talked about the farrowing process and the sort of things you do at farrowing. I'm going to try and sort of concentrate, show you what we do, how we cope with, for example, large litters, and perhaps talk a little bit about systems and some of the science, some of the research that has gone on at Harper and elsewhere. So without further ado, I'm just going to make this box at the bottom a bit smaller. So that's me. I'm going to disappear now, just so I get us out of the way a little bit. As Alan said, just try and you're welcome to ask questions as we go along. So first of all, I just want to introduce our unit, and you'll see there on the right, we are a pretty good unit. We won an award a couple of years ago, and we've managed to make our health status good for the last sort of 20 odd years. So even though we have thousands of students around the university, we still manage to maintain a health. So that's the key, as far as I'm concerned, for maximising performance and keeping good performance going is overall sort of biosecurity, and I'm sure we're all very aware of that. Just to highlight some of our points, we batch farrow every 3 weeks, 32 litters. We have about 230 odd sows. We have less than that now because we're producing quite a lot of pigs, and so we actually have slightly less sows than we used to because our finishing unit is only the set size. So we're now up to high 13s pigs weaned per litre. Our biggest batch recently, we managed to get 15.8 weaned per sow on each batch, each sow in a batch, a couple of batches ago. So we're pretty high level of output, and we're now well over the sort of 32 pigs per sow per year. We have managed to maintain our health status, and that's sort of indicated with those sorts of weight of weaning, weaning 8.7 kilos at 26 days of age. And by batch farrowing every 3 weeks, we have to fix the age at weaning at 26 days. I'll come back to batch management in a minute. Vaccination, we do have circovirus on the unit. We see it every so often, so we vaccinate for that. We also vaccinate for EP, but we don't actually have EP. That's just a precautionary thing that we were advised to do. And again, just general health stuff here. Growth rates post-weaning about 410, average slaughter age 145 days, and we get them to about 108 kilos in that time. And the growth rates are there, sort of 850 grams a day. So it's all good news. But what I want to do today is just to use our experience and then try and apply some of the principles that might impact on your systems. So I'll start with the top one, and that's genetics. If you're going to have big litters, and this is the way the genetics has gone. Here's a little recap. 1988, the Meishan arrived in the UK. That was the sort of first sort of event that was on my horizon that demonstrated that sows can have pretty big litters. Since that time, the Europeans and now the Brits have sort of caught up a little bit. And that sow on the left-hand side there, that was our best litter. Happened last year so far with our current breeding stock, which is Topics. And there's 27 pigs there born alive, none born dead. So that's one of the big issues. How can we manage our litter size? The good news is, and I'll probably show some data on this, not only have we genetically got sows that produce bigger litters, but they also produce more milk, and they also have 2 more teats. So we're looking for a minimum of 14, and a majority of ours now have 16 teats. So that's one thing that has happened. So I suppose the first bit of advice, if you are looking for litter size, select the animals with more teats. I know that's a more sort of long-term thing, but certainly the Europeans have been doing that over the last 20 odd years, and now that's not uncommon. When I started pig farming 40 odd years ago, 10 to 12 teats was the norm. So that's the sort of long-term stuff that you might want to think about. And if you are breeding your own, then do keep an eye on teat number and functional teat number. Here's just some data that I've picked up from the Harper unit. This is all Harper unit over the years. So I've been there 25 years, so I've pulled this data going back in time. And you can see quite clearly what's been happening. We've sort of litter size has gone up from 12.5 up to sort of 17. Average birth weights haven't come down as far as you might expect, I don't think. 1.4 kilos average birth weight as opposed to 1.5 way back when. So that's good news. Everybody says with large litters that, oh, you can't have large litters because they're all born too small. Well, the Meishan showed us the way on that one. Even the Meishan pigs piglets were small, but they lived. There's more to it than just size. The coefficient of variation hasn't changed a great deal. So again, it just shows that the variation within the litter isn't changing as we go to bigger litters. And what has happened with that slight reduction in birth weight is there are slightly higher percentage piglets born at less than 1 kg. Numbers born dead hasn't changed, I would say. And I would say neither has the pre-wean mortality as a percentage. So again, the sort of a lot of the sort of politics out there sort of say that going for large litters is bad news. Well, I'm not sure whether that's the case or not. If you've got it coming through the genetics, if you're selecting sows that can not only have big litters, real big litters, then there isn't such a big issue. Here's some data from last year on the Harper unit. So this is 2021 data for 12 months worth of data. So again, what I've done here is a parity analysis just to highlight, and I'm sure we all know this. One way of having sows that can look after piglets is to perhaps cull them after they've had sort of five or six litters, rather than having sows go on and on. Here's our data. Our gilts are having sort of 15.5 on that top row there, and they peak at between 2 and 6 at sort of 17, nearly 18. Total litter in the older sows is still quite high, but the next one down is pretty straightforward. Again, I don't think I'm sort of preaching stuff that hasn't been thought about before. As the sows get older, we get a lot more born deads, stillborns. So the overall effect of that is there are less born alive. That line, the fourth line down, is all about fostering, the net fostering. So that sort of indicates what we do on our unit. Because we're batch farrowing 32 together, all within 2 or 3 days of each other, we are fostering, and our net foster is the gilts take on average an extra pig on top of what they're born with. The top performing sows in the middle there, they're losing pigs, half a pig to foster off, and there's less of the older sows pigs fostered off, simply because I think anecdotally the older sows generally lose more piglets before we even get to fostering. There's a good point. There we are. There's our functional teat number. So we're looking at just under 15 on average. Okay, and even the older sows have a good functional number of teats, but that's purely a function of they're the ones we keep anyway. So we just make sure that we don't keep anything that loses functional teats, because you can't wean. If you're expecting a sow to wean over 14 piglets, you need 14 teats. So again, average birth weights, does that change between parities? Well, again, the older sows tend to be a little bit lower. They on average weaning on our unit half a pig less. Average weaning weight again per pig is lower. That second from bottom there, that row there, total weaning weight. Now that's an interesting number. The sort of mid-range parities are doing 120 kilos of piglet at 26 days. Now that's more than the older sows, and it's more than the gilts, which you'd expect that pattern. But the big news is the size of that number. 20 years ago, that would have been 80 kilos. So that's what's happening now. Our modern day sow is producing a heck of a lot more piglet, i.e. more milk. And again, the pre-weaning mortality is subtly a lot higher in the older sows. So basically, the summary of that slide is, older sows aren't helping you. And if you are struggling keeping piglets alive, then one way to make sure that your sort of management is alleviated a little bit is to cull out the older sows. So next up on my sort of agenda would be, if we're going to manage our litter, it's no use waiting for them to be born and then worry about, oh my gosh, I've got all these piglets born, what do I do with them? You've got to plan ahead. So the top story there is to cull sow, which we just talked about. The next story I would put across is batch management. Now we batch every 3 weeks. We've got 200 sows. We're not a massive farm. The farms some of the farms I tend to see is sort of 1,000 sows plus. even those guys will be starting moving over to 3-week batch management. What 3-week batch management does for us is it just makes a small unit into a big unit. So those of you out there that do have sort of medium to small size units that are sort of commercial, you know, if you've got sort of 20 or 50 sows or something, if you batch farrow every 3 weeks, you immediately triple the number of sows that are farrowing within that set period, that batch period. If we had our normal weekly farrowing on our herd, it would be 10 a week, but we do 32 every 3 weeks. And immediately you get the benefits of bringing your sows together, having them farrow at the same time, gives a small herd big benefits. It basically, you've got to synchronize the sows and gilts, okay? And the big benefit you get is you can then foster. So if they're all farrowing on the same day or same couple of days, then that gives you the opportunity to foster. And at the end of the day, that is going to help an awful lot with rearing little piglets. It does require AI. You're not going to have the bore power to batch farrow if you're serving them all at the same time. But if you're synchronizing them, then that will enable AI to be used, even in small herds. And I think that's quite important, because whenever I don't have much to do with lots of little herds, but whenever I have, that one of the big problems I've found is getting them pregnant and knowing when they're coming on heat and managing that side of it. And if you're synchronizing them, then AI becomes that little bit easier. So, for example, if you've just got 1 or 2 sows, just try and synchronize them. Or if you've got a sow and a gilt, try and synchronize the gilt to farrow at the same time as the, or to come on heat at the same time as the sow. How do we do that? Progesterone analogs. So there's a picture of Fred on the unit. It's a liquid format. It's the same. It does the same job as a sponge in a ewe, except in a pig you've got to drench the gilt or the sow. If they've got to be cycling. Okay, so you've got your gilt cycling. If you're sort of if you've weaned a sow and she's sort of cycling post weaning, whatever, then again it's the same story. You feed this stuff for 18 days. It's quite sweet. You see there, Fred. They just line up. You know, once they've got a taste for it, they'll just line up. Come to you, line up, and you just put a squirt in the mouth for 18 days. Each animal. And then at the end of 18 days, you stop doing it, you withdraw it, and then 5 days later, they all come on heat together. And it works on the dot, okay? So again, that's the sort of product you want to be talking to your vet about. And therefore, even if you can just sort of get 2 sows to farrow, or a sow and a gilt to farrow on roughly the same day, that's going to help you enormously. It costs a bit of money. I don't know what the current price is, but it will cost a bit of money. But if it also means that you can use a bit of AI, that might help with your mating process. So what I'm trying to get sort of a message across is the management in lactation starts way back at service time. Late gestation management. So moving on a bit, we've got them pregnant. If we're going to have a good strong litter, then we've got to think about raising the feed into the sow in late gestation. Don't overfeed. We don't want to see condition scores more than 4, because that's going to cause problems at farrowing. And if you then get problems at farrowing and piglets are born lethargic and weak, then that's not going to help you at all. So we're looking for sort of half a kilo more, say, but don't feed them the extra food if they are much more than condition score 3. Certainly not more than 4. Too much feed, by the way, can also cause a little bit of mastitis around farrowing. If the sow is producing far too much milk at farrowing, what causes mastitis is too much milk, and the piglets aren't drawing it off. So if mastitis is a problem in your herd, then you know, that's perhaps something to think about. A program of vaccination, I'm sure you've all got that sorted. It's important to keep on top of your health, as I said earlier, and vaccines are very useful, and particularly just before farrowing, because remember the piglet is disease-free when it is born. Okay, well, whatever the status of the sow, whatever the status of the unit, the piglet is born disease-free. And if you can clean up the sow and stop her shedding E. coli, for example, in her feces 2 or 3 weeks prior to farrowing, you've cleaned the pen, and you're not going to get the challenge into the piglets. So keep on top of your vaccinations, and they usually happen just before farrowing. Again, treat for any lice and mange you might have, worms. Outdoor sows generally need worming. Our indoor unit, we very rarely use a wormer, simply because we don't have a worm build-up. The pens are being cleaned out on a regular basis, and there's no sort of soil for them the worms to get a hold on. But outdoors, absolutely, you want to be thinking about worming, and again, it's best to do that just prior to farrowing. Just think about the hygiene of the environment and the sow. Wash the sow if necessary. Keep the environment clean into which she's going to farrow. Hygiene is absolutely important. And the good thing about batch farrowing, again, I keep coming back to batch farrowing, is because you're lumping your animals together in a single batch. What you then have is a whole room or a whole building being emptied and filled at the same time. And if you do it if you're batch farrowing every 3 weeks, the way the thing works, and you're weaning every 4 weeks, after 4 weeks, you have to have 10 days empty in the farrowing room, and that gives you plenty of time to clean, disinfect, dry, disinfect again, and absolutely have a squeaky clean environment for these animals to farrow into. So I think that goes without saying. And finally, there, just remember, piglets are born disease-free, and it's what you do at farrowing, and very soon after farrowing is what causes them to get sick. How do we maximize litter size in gestation? Thinking about individual management, feed to condition score, I talked about that. Gestation diets, we're looking for a 14% protein ration. That's the sort of level we're at, about 0.6% lysine. And we'll feed 3 kilos, and it might go to 3.5 if we think the sow isn't good enough condition. Don't like to mix post-service. Okay, anything you do in terms of mixing post-service that can cause mummified piglets to die halfway through. Again, it's not just the litter size you're affecting there, but if you've got infections in the sow at farrowing, then you might find the rest of the litter might be impacted on. And obviously, remember, extra care through embryo implantation around sort of day 10 to day 14, up to day 20. That's the critical time when these embryos are being implanted into the uterus, and that's the critical time when you lose piglets. That figure there just demonstrates it quite clearly. 26 eggs are released by sows, and that's why we can end up with sometimes sort of 27 piglets born, because most breeds will be ovulating 25, 26, 27, 28 eggs at the start, and where you lose most piglets is in that day 10 to day 20 period. Once you've gone past day 35, then those piglets come out as mummified piglets. They don't get reabsorbed. Anything that dies before day 35 is reabsorbed, and you don't see any evidence. But post day 25, so if you are having litters with lots of mummified piglets in there, you can look at the size of the mummified piglet. If they're just a small brown blob, then they died early on. If they're a fully formed piglet, then maybe it died just a couple of days before farrowing. But then you can start making management decisions as to why that might happen. Okay, even those Michan sows, they only ovulate the same number as our normal European breeds. So it's litter size is very much dependent on the way the animal deals with the litter during gestation. So that's quite an interesting point to make. In terms of mummified pigs, if we want to stop mummified pigs, then how do we prevent it? Well, making sure our sows are healthy, not getting some sort of infection, erysipelas, E. coli, vaccinate against parvo. Parvo is an absolute one that's out there. You are going to have poorly pigs born, weaker pigs born, if the sows are being affected mildly or severely by parvo. Moldy straw is another good one. Absolutely avoid moldy straw. Don't put moldy straw in with your sows. The mold in the straw causes estrogenic mycotoxins, and if they get a big dose of that, they'll actually abort. You're basically putting a sort of thing that looks a little bit like estrogen into the system, and that's not good for pregnant animals. Avoiding stress, mixing, moving, environmental changes, whatever you can do to avoid stress during gestation is going to stop or reduce the number of mummified piglets. Moving on quickly then, stillborns, quite straightforward. I think most of the stillborns, piglets born dead, suffocate during the farrowing process. 80%, some will be dead before the farrowing process starts, but most suffocate during the process. And 90% of these stillborns are generally in the second half of farrowing. So that says something, doesn't it? You've got to be wary. If you've got a prolonged farrowing process, then you're more likely to get stillborns. And this is where the older sows start to fail. They start not pushing out their piglets as quickly as they should do, and they end up having more stillborns. Reduce stillborns by reducing the parity. We've talked a little bit about that. There's some evidence from the AHDB. Numbers are born dead as sows get older. Clearly that goes up, and that hasn't changed ever since I started pig farming anyway. Reducing stillborns, cull old sows, avoid stress, acclimatise sows to the farrowing room as best you can, get the correct body condition, check sows regularly during the process. It's not that easy sometimes when you're outdoors, but that's one of the benefits of indoors. And if you have trouble checking, or you're not getting up at night and you're just leaving them to get on with it, then there are chemical ways that you can use to induce sows to farrow during the working hours, and that does help some people. If they're born at a time when you can look after them, then again you're gonna be there. You're gonna do the job. Some word of warning on that one, though. You've got to know their service date, and you have to know when they're going to farrow. If you start using induction methods in sows, you can't do it more than 2 days before they farrow. So, for example, if I've got a sow that's due to farrow on a Saturday, I could inject her on the Thursday morning, and the way the drugs work is 24 hours later she will farrow Friday morning, start farrowing Friday morning, and then she'll farrow through the day. And so by Friday, 5 o'clock, she's done, and I can then go home and have an evening, and not to worry about what happens over the weekend as well. So you can pull them forward a day or two, okay, and get them to farrow at a time that's more convenient for you. Because again, one of the big issues with managing litters is actually being there, and the stockmanship that's involved. I just left this slide in, it's talking about weaning weight, but if we're going to look after, one of the reasons why it's really good to look after our litters as we go through, because we want to maximize weaning weight. And if we're going to maximize weaning weight and look after big litters as well, then fostering to teat capacity is really important. So we've got to assess the sow or gilt, know how many teats she's got that are functioning. You've got to maximize the milk production. That's more about how you feed the sow and what genetics you've got, obviously. And then supplementary feed. And you can see in that picture there's a creep feeder in there. I would always recommend you try and get some sort of solid food into the piglets prior to weaning. On an indoor unit, that's really quite easy. Not so easy outdoors, but if there are ways and means of doing it. I have seen creep arcs out in outdoor fields where there's a bar across the door. The sow can't go in, but the piglets can. So as they roam, they're allowed to roam in groups, and as they roam, they can find their way into a feeder, a bit like a calf feeder for cows. Health is obviously massive. So we're talking about hygiene. The way that you improve your performance through health is to reduce the challenge of the bugs. So that's the hygiene, vaccinations, and the overall environment you keep the pigs in, and the defense of the individual animal. And therefore we're talking about the colostrum that they get and the nutrient intake for each individual piglet. So I don't mind small pigs, I don't mind big litters, I don't mind small pigs. The important thing for me is that every pig in the litter is getting what you think it should be getting in terms of colostrum and food. There's a classic sort of colostrum story. If they don't get the colostrum, their immune systems are not working. Their immune systems don't really get going until sort of week 2, 3, 4 post-birth. And even with colostrum, there's a slight sort of immunity gap where the passive immunity from the colostrum and the active immunity from the piglet doesn't actually happen, and that occurs about week 2 to 3. But if you get an individual piglet that doesn't get any colostrum for whatever reason, then it's going to get sick. It has not got the defense that it needs to keep itself healthy. And that leads us on to split suckling. If you can manage the litter, the first half of the litter, pull it away. If the sow's been farrowing for 2 or 3 hours and she's got half a litter's worth, that might be 8 pigs, 10 pigs, 12 pigs, whatever, pull them off after a couple of hours. Okay, they've all had a drink, they've all got what they've needed. Put them in a little box, or in this case, a picture there of a little cage within the farrowing pen. Keep them away for sort of an hour, hour and a half, and then the second half of the litter, as they're born, they get round, they find the teat, and they get some colostrum. Believe me, when you've got 27 pigs that have just been born, the last one out doesn't stand much of a chance of getting anywhere near that teat at all. Okay, all by itself. It might not happen. And that's absolutely critical in my book. If these piglets are not getting any colostrum or any food for, say, the first 3 or 4 hours, they're going to go backwards. And remember, pigs start to die when they're born. Okay, they might end up dying on day 4, they might end up dying before weaning, post weaning, but they start to die on day 0. And that's really important. So pull half the litter away, put them in a box, keep them nice and warm. You're not going to harm them, and then let the second half of the litter have a go. And then you know for sure that every pig's had a good dose. If you want to go down the route of collecting some colostrum and squirting it and drenching and that sort of thing, if you've got time for that, well, that's fine, depending on the scale we're talking about. But split suckling for us works a dream, and is such a straightforward thing to do. So there's a little bit of I'm not sure whether you're going to get access to this presentation, but there's the sort of things that we can do. We can split suckle, we can assist suckling, and we can hand feed colostrum if you find the time. What we also have to maintain our unit and good performance is, indoor units, so it's quite straightforward. We have a milk-based system. So we have a supplementary milk system, and the research that we did, I'll go on to show that, is that we have that on at birth. Okay, it's really important to have that available. So there's the actual kit. The picture one at the top there, that's the inside of the tank. You'll notice there's a little ball valve in there. So you make up the milk, you pour it in, you only make up enough milk for the day. You put it in the tank, and then there's a float there. And as the level of milk in the tank goes down below the float, then water is introduced. So it doesn't matter if you don't put quite enough milk in that tank at the beginning. There'll always be liquid in there, and if the milk runs out, then it'll just get diluted with water, and it'll get diluted, and then the next day you'll come along you empty the tank, just pour it away, get rid of whatever's in the tank, and put fresh in. You never put new milk on top of old, because these systems work well, and there isn't a lot of work involved with them in terms of cleaning pipes, but you've got to manage the milk on a daily basis. You've got to just put enough in for the day and discard anything that's left over. You soon learn, once, if you're pouring it away, at the end of the day, you soon learn roughly how much you need to put in. And it goes up. The first day, they probably only eat, the whole litter. I think on our 32,000 litres, we probably, on the first day, will put about 4 litres of milk in that bucket. But that's enough. That is enough to give that little piglet that hasn't got a teat a little mouthful of milk, and that's what it needs. So that's the kits, 1 and 2, 3. That's what's in the bowl. So there's a little nipple in there, that little black thing in the middle there, that the piglet plays with that, and the milk comes out. Picture 4 there basically is showing them as they're a little bit older, and that's now got the creep feeder in there. So we put that in around day 14, and again, I wouldn't be without creep feed at all. It's a no-brainer for me. Every kilo of extra weight of piglet at weaning is 7 to 10 days quicker to slaughter, and it's a healthier animal, and it's all good news. So creep feed very much, but again, a little and often. Decent creep feeder, which isn't going to get contaminated, and you can't have the stuff sort of going moldy or anything like that. So try and nice clean area. And then just picture 5 there. Again, the pen environment's important. We use heat mats, so the floor has got a heat mat in there just to keep them nice and warm and away from mother. So I'd thoroughly recommend extra milking. Here's my evidence anyway. This is work we did quite a few years ago now. But if we look there were 3 treatments: no milk, milk from farrowing, and extra milk from day 7. And to be honest, on the bottom line, well, that's the number in blue there. You've got how many piglets died per litre in the first week. Over half a pig died when there was no milk available, and almost 0 pigs died when there was milk available. And if it was only available from day 7, then you're halfway between. So the upshot is, at the bottom line there, 7.7 of a piglet weaned more, which is absolutely, it pays for the milking, it pays for the milk, it pays more, it pays it all, and you get a healthy animal, and you've got better welfare, and there's lots and lots of pluses to this sort of system. There's not a lot more I can say about it, really. It does work. And a lot of the indoor units now, and a lot of the companies, the Cargills of this world, the ABNs, they're all starting to sell milk product, and they also will sell you the system and the cups and the equipment and everything else that goes with it. So it's something that the indoor guys are very much cottoning on to right now. So in summary, for the milk line, every pen is a nursery pen. It takes the worry away from having to foster off or hand rear or do any of that. You know the milk is in every pen, and you leave, once you've done it well, what we do is we will foster down, and we will average 15 and sometimes 16 piglets on every litter post foster. And we'll leave that, and we won't touch them again. So we do all our fostering all in the first basically day. The first day, after they've had the colostrum, we will process them, we'll do their teeth, tails, etc. And that's when we'll do the fostering, and we'll even up the litter, even up them for litter number. I'm not very interested at all in trying to even up the size of the piglets. The udder has variations. There's more milk at the front than the back. And as long as a piglet can get a teat, I have no compunction in necessarily putting all the big pigs on one sow and all the little pigs on another sow. So long as there's enough teats for every piglet that's in there, then then the pig will find its teat. Because remember, the milk is only available for 30 seconds. So that big boisterous pig isn't going to take the milk from the other piglets because it's fixed to its teat. And once it's moved off its teat, there isn't any milk left in any of the other teats anyway. So I'm not a big believer in more, excessive fostering, just to even up litters in terms of their weight, their size, but certainly the litter number we do foster. So we do that once, we do it at the beginning, and when we've got the milk on, you see, even if a piglet isn't getting what it should be getting, every pen is a nursery pen. The milk's got to be available from birth because that's the critical time. It's too late. By the time you got to day 7, and I always say this, if you've got a piglet that you notice is going backwards on day 4, it started going backwards on day 0. And if you only notice it on day 4, it's possibly too late to do anything about it. And all your hard work of trying to hand rear and give a bit of TLC makes it a lot harder if you don't pick up on it earlier. So it's almost a no-brainer. If you're worried about this sort of thing, then, if you've got sort of a single sow that you've farrowed and she's got a big litter, just assume that there are piglets in there that aren't going to get anything, milk her off and dose them. Put some, get a syringe out and dose every piglet. And if you really think you've got a big litter and not enough teats and things aren't happening, then do it every day. That's really my only sort of advice for this sort of, if you've only got sort of one sow farrow at a time and the litter size doesn't really match up with the number of teats. This extra milk does give us some benefit in terms of weight at the end of the day, but it's mainly, what I'm talking about here is mainly keeping the things alive and getting that milk into them very early on. I agree, it's not easy outdoors. And this is where, I say you may come up with a system where you actually physically, you have a protocol and you say, right, well, I'm going to mix up some milk and I'm going to go around every pig and I'm going to give it a dose. And that's it. But again, that adds a lot of time. Systems issues. I've got a bit of a section here with just talking a little bit about systems. We've got indoor systems. We have the left-hand picture there. That's a fine crate Harper unit. These other two aren't. These are ones I've taken in. That middle picture is a sort of where we might be going on indoor units with this sort of free farrowing type systems, where we're not using the crate anymore. We're giving the animal a lot more space, and then we've got the outdoor. I think there's no right and wrong about this. A system is a system. You have to deal with it. Hand you're dealt with. But where are the risks? Ask yourself, where are the risks? How do pigs die? What information have you got that indicates what might be going wrong? Okay, and that might be a very straightforward thing for me to say, and it may be sort of a bit of a no-brainer, but check yourself and just think about it, because I can see one or two things in each of those pictures where there is a bit of an issue, and I'll perhaps come on to those. Think about what the individual piglet is experiencing or the sow is experiencing, and what is the piglet's desire. Don't just think, oh, a piglet just wants to eat and grow. Maybe the piglet doesn't want to eat and grow. Okay, maybe it does like sitting in a corner and being different to everybody else. What is the individual piglet's requirements? And then try and do something about it. For example, and this is absolutely classic, access. We all think that if there's a sow there, even if there's the right number of piglets for the right number of teats, does the piglet actually get what we think it's getting? It's an absolutely fundamental question, but sometimes it doesn't. And the classic one is split suckling, is colostrum. You might assume that a piglet's born, you've taken it from the back of the sow, you've dried it off, you've put it around by the udder, and you've pushed its mouth around a teat, and you've said to it, come on, piglet, drink some milk, and then you've gone away and left it for half an hour, has it? Or, 30 seconds after you've left, has it just been pushed off and never got anything? So you've really got to sort of think about what the access is, and do piglets get what we think they should be getting by system. And part of my sort of big thing is making records, and it's fairly straightforward. We record the death of every pig. It's more, when you're pig farming, livestock farming, it's more important to know what happens to your dead animals than it does to your live ones. Your live ones are all right, it's all worked and they've got through. It's the dead ones, the important ones. You've got to record the dead ones. You've got to know why the dead ones are dead. Okay, and there's no, it's much better to make records of dead animals than it is of live animals, because then it gives you an opportunity to change things. So here we have our records. We have every piglet that dies, and we have which day it's died on. So I've categorized this into different age groups, sort of, day 0 to 1, day 2 to 3. And if you just start at the top there, laid on. Okay, so this is percentage of those that died. 38.8 or 39% of all our mortality on our unit are laid on in day 0 to 1. So that's our big issue. It's absolutely straightforward. There are a few that get laid on day 2 to 3 and 4 to 7. And there's even the odd pig that might get laid on at day 20. Okay, but there's our big one. Okay, lameness, is that an issue on our unit? Not really. We might get a bit of damage towards the end of lactation. So what's happening there? Are they fighting? Is there enough space for the piglets? Don't know, but it's only a small amount. Starvation, when is that happening? Well, you can see there, if we classify a pig as died of starvation on day 2 to 3, it obviously hasn't suckled at all. But again, hopefully that is a bit of an issue for us, but it gives us a story there. It certainly shows us that later on in lactation, late lactation, we're not losing very many at all. Savaging, well, a small number die, and that's all about the gilts. So having a split suckling system in place, having a bucket, having a cage where you can put the piglets away, absolutely, that's a bit of a no-brainer. If you've got a sow that's having it, or a gilt that's having a go at some piglets and killing them, then that's a no-brainer. Non-viable pigs, so we do have a category of non-viable. They're just so weak, they just never really get up after they're born. And again, that's an issue at farrowing, isn't it? That's whether we should assist on that or whether we shouldn't assist. You're always going to get, sows are litter species that you're always going to get some that are not going to be viable. There's a nice line for me: no scour on our unit whatsoever, and that's all down to hygiene. It's all down to the hygienic conditions that we've got and a proper management of our disease. A little bit of meningitis, not that much. A little bit of splayedness. This was 2014 data. I haven't really seen much splayed legs, but that we often see that when you get a bit of mycotoxin. If you get some moldy straw in there, that gives you a sort of weaker piglets and a bit of splayed legness. And a few miscellaneous ones there. So there's our mortality. At the time, it was 12.7% mortality. And you can see most of that mortality, over half, is on the first day. And then 25% is on the next day, next 2 days, and there is very little mortality after that. If we can, everybody says, oh, the modern sow is much worse than in the old days, everything worked well. Well, Peter English's work back in 1977 on his PhD, he was recording commercial sows, and he was recording 18% mortalities. And you'll notice there that actually day 0 to 1 wasn't as important as it is now, simply because so much more died later on. So, if you have a bit of analysis like this and you can work out when animals are dying or why they're dying, then you can sort of perhaps change your system to solve the problem. I've also got, unfortunate position is we weigh pigs at birth, so I've got some birth weights here, and And this is the sort of average birth. Everybody says, oh, well, it's always the little ones that die. Well, not necessarily. Those that get laid on, our average birth weight at this stage was 1.46 kilos, and the average weight of those laid on was 1.21. So there were some pigs in there which were being laid on that were quite big. And so it goes, sure, absolutely. The non-viables, that's the tiniest, that's the less than 600 gram jobs. And there's very little chance that those guys end up living. And so it goes. So a little bit of understanding of the variation you get, the birth weights, etc., gives you a good estimate of where you're going wrong, and therefore what can you do about it. What did we do with this data? Well, we think about it. This is the classic sort of lecture material I give. You know, death is all about a process. You know, there are ways piglets die. The top line there, the top second line down there, infection, starvation, and crushing. Well, they are the sort of things that might happen to finish off a pig, but there's a lot of complex things that are happening before that. So a piglet might get crushed and die straight away, or it might get crushed, then become weak, and then get an infection and then die of that infection, or get weak and then starve. It might, right down there at the bottom, not have the colostrum and then have a reduced immunity, then get infected, or it might have not enough colostrum. Remember, colostrum also provides important energy source, so it becomes weak. It doesn't get the colostrum, it becomes weak, starved, doesn't establish a teat, never really does establish a teat, and then ends up dying a few days later. It becomes weak. You can get a good strong pig that might get injured, half crushed, becomes weak, and then might get a chill, and then it's immune. Then it might sort of have a low immune function, and then might die of some sort of infection. So what I'm trying to put across to you is, when you're assessing a piglet that dies, is you've got to try and work out what caused it to die. You know, it might have been laid on, but why did it get laid on? Can you make some sort of assessment of was it a random lay on, or was it the fact that the thing was starved, couldn't move out the way because it just wasn't strong enough, and therefore it got laid on? Well, the reason why that animal got laid on was because it was starved, not just a random effect of being laid on. So again, you've got to analyze this sort of data, and that's what we do all the time. To get these piglets off to a good start, then we're talking about supplementary heat, making sure that they don't lose heat, give them the right amount of bedding, not too much. I've seen farms where there's too much bedding put in, piglets get under the straw and then get laid on, simply because they don't even get seen by the sow. They're nice and cozy right where the sow wants to lie. So you've got to be careful on outdoor units and in arks that the straw distribution within the ark is correct, because if you can put too much in and you can put not enough in. And so we can perhaps talk about that later if someone's got a question on that one. Maintain temperature. It's got to be good temperature. Colostrum is critical. It's absolutely a source of energy, and stockmanship. You've got to be there. You've got to help. You've got to, pick up that little piglet that's not, getting some heat, and do something with it. And this is a classic picture from Emma Baxter. She presented this meeting in 2010. So here we have an infrared picture of a sow. Down there at the bottom, there is a piglet identified there as B. That had a temperature of 38.4 degrees, just newly born. And a little bit above it, there is another piglet, piglet A, and that's the one that came out before. And that's now 31.8 degrees C. Okay, just to demonstrate, these piglets, the minute they're born, they're losing heat. They are losing heat, and therefore they become more lethargic. And if they hang around that back part of the sow for too long, they lose heat. They never really get up very well, and they struggle to find a teat. And then the process of dying starts. Okay, but that's a really classic sort of picture to demonstrate that little piglet there that's been out. That may only be 10 minutes. You can drop from 38 surface temperature of the piglet from 38 down to 31 in just 10 minutes, no problem at all. Particularly if it's a drafty area, there's no other heat around there, you haven't got your heat lamps on or whatever. Even, you know, the other parts of the pen are sort of 20 degrees on the outside, you know, around the pen, so that's the sort of room temperature. Nice to notice there the udder, that's a very hot area, so that's why the piglets love to cuddle up against the udder, and that's nice and warm at 37 degrees. So, you know, that's the draw. The piglets like to go where the heat is, and if the heat source is the mother's udder, then that's where they're going to go. And if that's the only place where the heat source is, that's where they'll stay. And if that's where they stay, that's where they're going to get laid on when the sow stands up and rolls down again. Okay, so think about the temperature, put heat lamps on. If you've got a slatted floor, maybe put some paper down to stop the draft coming up from below, or just have a decent slurry tank where you haven't got drafts coming in from the outside from below the surface. Have a, you know, a nice sealed building, have the correct ventilation system, or have a bit of a solid floor somehow, or you can put guard down or something just to stop the drafts coming up from below. Whatever you do, just think about the temperature that piglet is experiencing, and it really does become quite straightforward. This is what we did in our response to finding out that, well, we knew the numbers, but you know, working out that laid-ons are our big issue. We refurbed one of our firing rooms with a new one system, and it works an absolute treat. So this is an indoor unit, firing crate, fully slatted floor, and you'll notice on the picture on the left there, the floor is flat. These are big pigs, big old pigs, and they can jump up and down quite happily up that step. But when they're first born, it's a different matter. So here you see in this picture that when the sow sits up, there is a switch just on her back there, just that three-pronged affair on the side of the crate there. That's activates the air rams underneath that push the crate up in the air, and then this sow is now up, and those piglets are now down below. And you can see that step is now too big for the piglets to step up. So basically, she stands up, she eats, she does whatever she's going to do, has a pee or defecates, whatever. And while she's doing that, all the piglets are moving down to the sides, and they're staying down to the sides. They can't get back up underneath her. And so when she does eventually lie down again, there's no piglets underneath her, and they don't get crushed. There was the performance there was 2014-15. That was the average performance. And then after we put this machine in the rooms, and we compared the rooms over, I think, 500 odd litters there. All parity sows, average parity sows with the Newen system, only 3% of the piglets of the mortality was caused by being laid on, whereas in the normal system it's more like 7%, or a mortality rate of 7%, i.e. 7% of all our piglets were being laid on. We dropped that down to 3%, so we halved the number of lay-ons. If we have a look at the older sows, then the story is a little bit better. Again, when you've got an older sow, they generally lay on more pigs. So that was up to 8% of piglets born to an older sow were dying normally. And in the Newen system, it dropped down to, again, 3%. Absolute no-brainer for us. It was a big investment. It was about £300 to £400 per sow placed just for the new system, just for the system, above and beyond the cost of the farrowing crate itself. But the payback's 4 years. Absolutely no-brainer for us on an indoor unit, and I definitely recommend that. It just works. It does what it says on the tin. It's a mechanical. It's still a farrowing crate. I get that, but it solves the problem of being laid on. Let's move on to more stuff on systems. I'm not quite sure I'm doing for time now. If I'm going on to
clock, Alan, so it's not. There's a few questions, so it's okay. We still have a.
What time is it, Ellen?
8 o'clock now. but
Oh, right.
it's
Oh,
fine.
my God.
You can, it's okay, carry on.
Tell me when I've gone on too long. If the people are writing in saying, "Oh, get this bloke off," then just stop me. I just want a little bit of history here. Back in the 1980s, Stolburn Woodgush sort of did a big family pen system up in Edinburgh. It was the kick-started outdoor pig production, to be honest. And what they did was they tried to put group housing of sows as they would be in nature into a building. Okay, they started off putting it in a paddock, so they had the paddock, the pen, the outdoor pen, and they just watched behavior. They learned about the groups of sows, how they interacted with the boar, etc., and how they actually lived. And then what I was involved with in the 1990s was a big research investment into a thing called the family pen, where we tried to bring it indoors. Okay, so it was basically studying behavior in a natural setting, having family groups of sows living together permanently, no abrupt weaning, allowing, you can see there, the boar is in with the sows and the sows are suckling their piglets. The natural thing is that piglets will wean themselves after about 10 weeks, but the sows actually start cycling after about 5 or 6 weeks naturally. This might give you some indication if you're a small farm and you only got 1 or 2 sows, and you tend to leave the piglets on the mother for a long time, sort of 6, 8, 10 weeks, then this sort of idea that, oh, you wean them, then they come on heat straight away 5 days later, actually doesn't work. It doesn't follow that rule. A lot of these sows that are still suckling at sort of 8 to 10 weeks will already be cycling. So this is why sometimes outdoor small farms, they find it difficult to actually identify when sows are on heat, because they don't actually come on heat straight away post weaning, because they're already cycling. But anyway, that's by the by. But what we learned from this sort of experiment, and you can see there on the left-hand side, that we created, instead of a nest outside, we created sort of places where sows could go and farrow. We were looking at all sorts of ways of arranging that. Was it free access to that, or did you lock the sow in for a couple of weeks? Outdoors, naturally, a sow will spend 2 weeks away from the herd. She'll go and build a nest in the wood under some under some branches. She'll build a nest, she'll hide herself away, she'll have a litter, and then day 10 to day 14 she'll come back and bring it back to the litter. So she's seeking isolation. She doesn't want to be in with the rest of them for that period of time. So having a place that she can stay with her litter is perhaps not such a bad thing, but it's not for 8 weeks. It's just for the first sort of few days. So that sort of is a bit of history, and it's quite an interesting thing that we've now developed that into more sort of systems, free farrowing systems for indoor units. So we have all sorts of things. We've got sort of straw-based systems. The one at the bottom there in the middle, that was at Harper. We had these opening-sided crates. The one on the right-hand side there, that's a Harper building where we've got free farrowing pens. The other thing that sort of led the way with this sort of group housing of sows is multi-suckling, having sows and litters in the same place, so they're all mixed in together, and that's not a bad thing. If you've got a sow that's sort of going backwards, actually doing a bit of multi-suckling does give every individual piglet perhaps a better chance. And I'll come back to multi-suckling in a minute. Here we are, multi-suckling. So that bottom right-hand picture, that is a commercial unit that multi-suckled all the time. Those sows farrowed in a farrowing crate, and then 14 days later, he took 5 or 6 sows out of the crates and put them in a straw pen like that. And that was his indoor system. That was how he did it. He didn't have very many farrowing crates, and he just used them for the first 2 weeks. Does it work? Yeah, people can make it work. You can make it work on an indoor unit with farrowing crates, and that you can see that on the left-hand side there. And we actually do that. That's the Harper unit. If we've got far too many piglets that we can cope with, we basically multi-suckle, and we put all the spare extra pigs that we've got into the pen. So we usually mix together three litters, and we make sure there's plenty of creep in there. We make sure there's plenty of milk bowls in there, and anything that isn't getting mother's milk is getting it artificially. Okay, does it work? Yes, it does. We had a PhD working on this sort of system, and mixing piglets. You've got to do it at day 4. Do it in the middle. Don't. If you do it too early, the piglets get a check. If you do it before you wean, too close to weaning, they get a double check. They get a check at mixing, and then they get another check at weaning. What happens if you do it in the middle of lactation, i.e. about day 14, is that the piglets aren't that young, they can cope with it, but also by the time they've been mixed on day 14 and then weaned on day, say, 28, they've got 2 weeks to establish their new hierarchy in their pen of 30, and then it means that they don't get mixed at weaning. They don't need to be mixed. That group then moves on together, and then there's less weaning stress. So it's not just about the weaning process, but it's also about, we use it at Harper in our farrowing room sometimes when we get these extra piglets that we don't want to, we're not going to hand rear them. We're not going to specifically find a place to put them and start rearing them and do it all by hand. So we just create a multi-suckle pen, and it seems to work reasonably well. Just the fact that the piglets are in there with all the other piglets stimulates them to go to the other. There is a bit of cross suckling. One pig from one mother will go to another sow. Generally, what happens is when they're multi-suckling is they all lie down together and feed at the same time. They synchronize themselves. But in general, we find there's a benefit to managing these extra piglets. I just wanted to sort of continue on this one, and this is where I was really sort of maybe get you guys to think a bit. There's 2 pictures of a free farrowing system. Both are out there. The one on the right, they're in Lincolnshire. I'm not sure where the one on the left was. What are the issues? Can we see the issues? What little bits of a system are going to help us do our litter management, and what bit of a system is not? And I've highlighted 5 there, just between those 2 systems. They look the same. They've got a creep area. They've got a nice open area for the sow. It's all nice and hygienic. So you've got a slatted floor there on the left-hand side with a solid floor where the sow is. On the right-hand side, you're actually slatted all the way through with a little bit of solid in where the actual sow is there. But if you look on picture A, where's that sow lying? It's lying against the creep. Even if a piglet wanted to get underneath that lamp, it's not going to get there, is it? It's the sow's in the way. And therefore, that little piglet, the snout of the sow, is wondering, well, what do I do? I'm just a spare piglet. There's no space at the udder. Look, all the teats have been taken. I want to go and try and find somewhere warm, and I can't. So this is what I was trying to say earlier about access. That piglet hasn't got access to the warmth, although you might think it has. It hasn't, because the sow's lying in the way. What has pen B got that pen A hasn't got? And you'll notice there that middle yellow star opposite the creep, it's got those triangle bars that stop the sow from lying hard up against the vertical bars. And it's just a design difference. That's it. They are there to stop the sow from lying hard up against those bars. So however much she tries, there will always be space around the back of the sow for them to get into the creep area. The top yellow star, that's opposite. That's demonstrating what they've got hanging off the walls, and what you've got there on the left-hand picture, you've got the sort of bar that runs along the bottom that stops the sow lying against the wall, whereas the B, you've got this sort of triangle-shaped side piece of plastic that comes out from the wall, but then allows the sow to lie down against that. But then as it gets down, actually lies down, then there is a corner underneath that into which the piglets can get away and not get laid on. B also has a place for the sow to get fed, so that solves the problem of stockmanship and getting in there and dealing with the pigs. You can lock the sow away if you need to, whilst you get in and manage the piglets, and that's quite important for health and safety. B has also got, it's got a fully slatted floor, which keeps them more hygienically clean. That pen A, you've got to jump in there every day and get your Lincoln shovel out and scrape it off the solid if it starts to get mucky on the solid. So again, hygiene, and the different, the way it's managed is important. And then finally, it's a really subtle thing. It's also, B has also got a bar that stops, a bit like the fender on outdoor farms. You can't, the piglets can't jump out, and they're confined when they're little into that warm area. They can't wander off. And there is you might not notice, but there's on the right hand side of picture B, there is a sort of vertical barred window through to the next pen. And that is the design feature that basically, I come back to the point, what is the sow thinking? Well, when the sow is thinking about where she's living, she's thinking about where are the dangers going to be for my litter. And if you have a solid wall pen, then she feels quite safe because it's a solid wall and there's nothing out there. She might hear other sows in the room or whatever, but she can't see them, so they're all quite safe. But by putting a little window in that wall just where it is, basically says to the sow, well, if I can see the next door sow and I can hear the next door sow, then that's where the danger is going to be. And therefore, when I lie down in where my piglets are, I will face that window. I will be having one eye on that window. And therefore, the behavior of the animal is such that they lie where you want them to lie the right way. And you'll notice, it's sort of working on the picture A as well. The sow is lying with its snout towards those open barred gates, because the open barred gate is where any danger might be coming from. You won't get a sow lying in pen A with its snout in the bottom corner there where its tail currently is. Okay, so it's just a little feature. It's just something that manipulates the behavior of the animal so that you get them to lie where you want them to lie, and also if you get them to lie in where they're supposed to lie, you're probably getting better access for the piglets to the udder. So these little subtle differences between one system and another system are things to look out for when it comes to overall management. And if you can get the system to manage the sow because of the system, then it means you don't have to worry too much about the stockmanship, because you're not having to if the system works, then it works. Outdoors, again, the the wild sow that's just farrowed outside the ark, we have the fender to keep the piglets in. It's a good idea. Okay, there's a sow feeding on the outside. Maybe try and have some sort of contraption on the inside of the ark for the piglets to get some creek feed, or there are some people developing creek feeders for outdoor sows. But keeping the environment inside the ark's got to be right. You've still got to think about temperature, stopping drafts, putting doors on. If you've got a fox problem, putting doors on, even putting floors in the bottom of the ark might help. If you do have foxes coming around, if you don't think they're taking piglets, that's fine, but they can certainly cause sows to crush piglets. If you've locked a sow in an ark and a fox comes running around the ark, she can get quite disturbed, and if she's disturbed and she's up and down, then she'll crush piglets. So again, foxes can be. I've known farmers go out of business because foxes just decimating the performance. I'm going to stop there. Maybe we can let this presentation go for to everybody. Do you think you'll do that, Ellen? Do you think you'll make it available to everybody?
Yeah, and a recording will be available too. So
okay. The only thing I'll just very quickly run through this. There's a bit there on feeding. We're using an 18. We're actually using a 20% protein ration now. You know, if we're getting this 120 kilos of piglet produced from the sow's milk, then you've got to give it a good diet. And so that's where, you know, 20 years ago, it's 16% was this lactation ration. Now 20%, and the lysine's got to be 1.1, 1.2%. So it's a good ration. You pay a bit more for it, but it means that if the sow is milking properly and she's not got mastitis, your piglets will do better all by themselves. And keeping her cool, making sure the wallows are there, making sure the room is the right temperature. So that's what we're doing now. Artificial rearing, there are systems out there, you can find them. So there's boxes that you can buy. That one in the top middle there is there's something you can put in a pen, and it just delivers milk to piglets on a regular basis throughout the day on a timed basis, and it just, and the right hand side picture and the bottom picture, that's called the Nuttinga system. That was available 30 years ago. So there are systems available for artificially rearing. Creep is absolutely important. You can see there the graph. After about 3 or 4 weeks, then her milk production is not going to be enough to keep up with the piglet's demand, and therefore that's when you've got to be getting creep in, and we just pop a creep feeder in at day 14. The evidence to show what happens, well, I'll get to the next one. The 1 kilo difference at the beginning gives you about a 7 to 10 day benefit. There's a batch of our pigs, just one batch of 400 odd sows, piglets, sorry. When they get to slaughter, 104 pigs went in the first batch and were slaughtered. Okay, and then whatever it was, 259 went in the second batch. And then we just had 28 little ones left over, and they went to a different abattoir, slightly lighter weight, but out of 400 odd pigs, we only had 28 smallish ones. And look where they started, they were the small ones at weaning. The average weaning weight of the green line was 6 kilos, 7.8, the red line, and the black line, the average weaning weight was 9 kilos. So it just demonstrates the importance of getting them off to a good start and getting the nutrition into them. I'm not going to dwell too much on feeding. Suffice to say, if you do have a problem at weaning, something like the transition feeder, mixing solid food with water, mimics and is a transition between milk and solid food, and you might think that goes better. So if you're struggling to keep piglets going in late lactation and through weaning, then maybe think about what we call gruel feeding, mixing up a nice good quality dry feed, mixing with water, you end up with a gruel. And then there's a list of how to reduce piglet mortality. I'm